Sometimes I try some good sounding headphone amplifiers. Other times some great sounding ones that I'll remember for weeks after posting that video. But very rarely, maybe once or twice per year, an amplifier is so exceptional at everything it does that it reaches a legendary status, and today is that kind of day. Today I'll be testing the Feliks-Audio Envy Performance Edition that is overkill, overpowerful, it's very fun and dynamic, or in a single word, legendary sounding. The regular Envy goes for 7,000 euros, so yeah, this is high-end material, this is not your regular headphone amplifier. And if you go for the Performance Edition, then that will cost you an extra 800 euros. And if you add some fancy tubes or a custom wood finish, then prepare to pay a premium, because Envy is slowly becoming an art piece that sadly not a lot of us can afford. I was unable to put in this shot. As you can see, it's slightly bigger than your regular headphone amplifier, but don't worry, I'll add plenty of b-rolls for you to admire. And let's check it out in the usual fashion. Testing big, bold and ballsy sounding headphone amplifiers is not something new around here. Unfortunately, the Traumatic Primavera is no longer part of my arsenal, but I still have that Cayenne Soul 170 HA somewhere around the house. All of these free headphone amplifiers demand your full attention and appreciation, because these are pretty much the best headphone amplifiers that I have tried at my place for the last 15 years or so, even if all of these three sound completely different. However, if you take into consideration only the looks and the build quality, then the Envy is the most stunning headphone amplifier I ever laid my eyes on. Honestly, just look at it and tell me if it doesn't ooze style and refinement. At the moment you start turning the Envy around is when you realize how much thought was put into making it beautiful and practical. Heat dissipation is always an issue with transformer-powered tube amplifiers, biased into class A operation, but this time around I see many cleverly positioned spaces through which hot air can escape outside its enclosure, and in an 8-hour listening marathon it was barely warm at touch. The amazing part is that this is not just a headphone amplifier, but also an equally impressive preamplifier that you can put in between your DAC and your power amplifier and get that juicy and sweet sound of 300B tubes. In terms of controls, this fellow is very simple to control. We have just a 4-pin XLR and a regular headphone jack on the left, again an input switch on the right, and a huge volume knob in the middle. On its back we have 3 pairs of analog inputs in both RC and XLR flavors, and 2 pairs of analog outputs, just in case you want to use it as a preamp. As for tech inside it, first of all, you should know that this is a Class A single-ended transformer-coupled headphone amplifier and preamplifier. This is also a balanced one, because we have synchronizing transformers for each channel. Those are custom-made in Sweden by Lundal, and those are quite expensive transformers, and this is also quite different compared to a usual set amplifier. By the way, set stands for single-ended triode. Another difference compared to our regular set amplifier is that we have solid-state rectification as opposed to tube rectification, so some traits from solid-state amplifiers will be moving to the Envy, like a slightly faster pace, rhythm and timing, more technical performance, and also a high resolution than usual. Luckily for tube rollers, we have just 4 tubes, and believe me, this is actually a very big deal, because some of these tubes can be very expensive. We have a pair of 300B legendary power triodes and another pair of driver tubes. Those are 6 SN7. Luckily, I have a sizable collection of 6 SN7 tubes and a few 300B tubes, and I leave a few words about these as well. It also happens to be one of the most powerful amplifiers out there. It provides 8 watts of power in 16 ohms, regardless of its headphone jack, because this is a set amplifier, and if you want that distortion super low, then that would be around 5 watts in the same load. Besides changing the gain switch also changes the output impedance of the amplifier, which will have quite an effect on dynamic headphones. So you'll need to experiment with every headphone you own, which gain setting works best for you. However, in my case, I used mid-gain for all of my headphones, except for one that demanded high gain, and that was Susvara OG. Okay everyone, this is pretty much it. Let's hit some eardrums and let's see how it sounds with a bunch of headphones and also REMs. I will skip the part where I will tell you about the burn-in period, but I will just mention that it sounded bad in the first hours, in the first days. It needs about 2 weeks of burn-in or at least 150 hours until it starts sounding really good. And also don't forget, if you buy new tubes, those also need some heating and cooling hours until they sound very good, so take that into consideration. At first I was a little bit skeptical that the Envy would drive every single headphone that I have in my collection, and also I didn't feel that it was a threat to the Tracfomatic Primavera and also to the Cain Soul 170HA, but at the same time those two are not using those legendary 300B tubes, and also neither of those are using solid state rectification, so I was prepared for anything from that point. Sound-wise, if you get the standard edition with the Electro Harmonics 300B tubes and also with the PS Vane CV181, then even after the burn-in finishes, the sound will be a little bit grainier and, dare I say, a little bit hotter sounding up top, but go with some new all-stock tubes and with some current production Western Electric 300B and the sound will take a 180-degree turn, sounding much lusher, much richer, to a point of becoming lifelike. As for me, I went with current production Western Electric 300B. Those are rich, lush, big, very resolving. I like them. And also with the craziest double triodes that you can buy right now, those are the Kenrad black glass. You need to hear these to understand what's the fuss about these. Very crazy dynamics, punchy, incredible oomph in the bass, resolving, big sounding, natural mid-range. For me, these are basically the best double trios that you can buy. Those are new old stock. You can find them on reverb.com or also on eBay, but prepare to pay a pretty penny because those are quite rare nowadays. So the Envy is not your ultra linear or almost solid state like sounding headphone amplifier. I hear this a lot on various hi-fi forums. But this is not quite true, because you can make it as you wish. You can make it lush, rich, you can make it bright, ultra linear, exactly as you want. I believe that tube rolling makes actually quite a big difference on the Envy. Not so much on other amplifiers, but on the Envy the difference is substantial. Overall, this is by far the most chameleon-like sounding headphone amplifier and preamplifier that I have tried in recent years, as you can tailor its sound to your preference. And given the limited number of 6 SM7 and 300B variants available, I'm confident that there won't be 2 Envies that will sound the same. Let's be serious for a second. You aren't really buying a 15 kilo monster of an amp to drive some super tiny IEMs like this. I don't feel safe doing that, but for the sake of science, let's do it. The only thing that you should know is that low gain is not just lowering the gain, but also the output impedance of the amplifier. And knowing the rule of 8s, it just makes sense to use a low gain with ultra-sensitive IEMs like these. These are the FIO FH19 hybrid IEMs with a sensitivity of 109 dB per a single milliwatt of power. So out of 8,000 milliwatts available on tap, just one is needed to arrive at 109 dB, which is very, very loud. Unsurprisingly to me, it was completely dead silent with these IEMs. I went even much louder, and again I couldn't hear anything just for a few seconds. But if I pause the music and go much louder, then I can hear a little bit of noise. But mind you, I cannot listen to music at that point. I will probably damage these IEMs as well and my hearing as well. So this is a very IEM friendly amplifier. I also used some other IEMs like FIO FA19, Westone, Mach 80, and again it was completely dead silent. The background was completely black. So in my opinion, this is an IEM friendly amplifier, and the same happens with some ultra sensitive desktop headphones like Rados, like focal headphones, like Apos Caspian. So I know many of you think that tube amplifiers are a little bit noisier, they have a higher distortion, but that is not always true, especially with high-end tube amplifiers like the Envy. It's completely noise-free, especially with current production tubes, as some new all-stock options could still increase a little bit the noise output slightly. So far, this is the second tube amplifier that didn't raise the noise floor with sensitive IEMs, which sadly cannot be said about Kain's Soul 170 HA, which is sometimes noisy even with a few desktop dynamic headphones. Alright, let's talk about power. I used mid-gain most of the time with most of my headphones except for one. Not because I had a little bit more headroom and a little bit more power, but because most of these headphones simply sounded better. High gain was used only with one single headphone from my collection, that was Hyphaman Susvara OG, and in truth it should be used only with the most demanding loads like Abyss 1266, Susvara OG, DCA Stealth and Expanse. The highest volume I could reach with the Envy was actually 11 o'clock position, so I couldn't go louder than that. It was already too much. So I had more than half of the headroom remaining on top, which is actually a little bit crazy. It was easily driving all of my headphones, including the Susvara OG, but mind you, I'm using the Rockner Wave Dream Signature that is outputting 7 volts via XLR as opposed to 4 or 4.5 volts like a regular DAC. So I had a little bit more gain and it would appear that the Envy is a little bit more powerful. But even with a regular DAC, like a 4 volt XLR DAC, the Envy is extremely powerful. And I never felt that it lacks dynamics or power or anything like that. And all of these headphones, T+A, Solitaire P, Susvara unveiled, HE1000 unveiled, and the biggest surprise, HD800S by Sennheiser. Oh my god, those sounded really dynamic, very alive, and also the mid-range was definitely a little bit lusher compared to how I know them to be in the stock form. So power-wise, I didn't have a problem driving all of these headphones with a plumb. There is plenty of power for anything you have at your disposal. Powerful set amplifiers excel at juggling with speaker drivers, let alone with headphones. And I'm not just about ear-damaging volumes you'll reach in no time, but rather about the remarkable dynamics the Envy is capable of. Both the Susvara variants and the Solitaire P simply spread their wings when fed absurd amounts of power, pushing and pulling their diaphragms like ragdolls. And all in all, this guy has all of the power you need for your entire headphone collection. I remember a couple of folks complaining that we never offer 100 points to the gear that we review on soundnews.net. When it comes to headphone amplifiers, I had just one single exception from this rule. That was the White Princess, the Trap-O-Matic Primavera in white gloss finish. That one sounded absolutely amazing in terms of soundstage, depth, holography. Everything was simply playing all around me, all at the same time, like listening to a near-field setup and not to a headphone setup. It was like every sound was coming from outside the office. Very unusual, but really interesting. But considering how much air is right now passing near me when I'm listening to the Envy with the Western Electric 300B, I'm simply compelled once again to give 100 points to the Envy in terms of soundstage, depth and holography. Absolutely amazing. Ain't No Sunshine by Tommy Schneider is starting playing, and this is an experience that completely relaxes every cell in my body. The T+A Solitaire P almost transforms into the Rado TD 2.2 loudspeakers that you can see behind me, and the depth was simply mesmerizing. The saxophone felt so close and so personal and then so deep into the mix that I was shocked how much space there was in between every note and individual instrument. However, what stunned me was the incredible stereo separation and 3D layering that only well-made tube amplifiers are capable of. I'll tell you a funny story. There was a time around 2022 when I owned the very best measuring 10 headphone amplifiers, but those weren't even close to the best 20 that I've heard up to that point. Those were okay, but those weren't really great sounding to my ears. I believe you can measure some things, and some of those are important, like the noise floor, like the channel separation, But some other things you cannot measure, that you can do only with the power of your brain. Like for example, dynamics, how punchy, how alive, the pace, the rhythm, the timing, that you can measure only with your tiny brain. Sometimes I feel connected to something greater than myself. This is true, but that happens only when I'm listening to music on a legendary sounding setup. This is definitely that kind of setup, especially if I'm using those Kenrad black glass with the new production Western Electric 300B. Dynamics going through this amplifier with this particular tube set is simply outstanding. It's crazy. And it's a little bit unusual because I've heard and I owned many other headphone amplifiers that provide a lot more power, and yet most of them cannot reach the same level of dynamics how Envy is doing so easily. So in terms of dynamics, can be described as punchy, as alive, as ass-kicking. It's really powerful in this regard. The amount of bass energy that is oozing from the Envy, especially with the Kenrads, is simply stunning. It's a lot. It's something that a bass head will truly appreciate, I believe. And it's not just a lot of bass, it's also very layered. It's a clean bass, it's a high quality type of bass, so yeah, this is impressive. A Class A set amplifier is usually catching your attention with its sweet mid-range, with lots of richness, with lots of meat on the bone, with an amazing soundstage holography, with just that effortless sound, but not so much with a technical performance. The Envy is, however, a very different set amplifier because we have point-to-point wiring, and if you go with the Performance Edition, we have better single crystal copper wiring. Also, we have those custom Lulal transformers, and don't forget that we have solid state rectification. So this is not just a lush, rich sounding with the right set of tubes, but also a very technical sounding headphone amplifier that is quite impressive in terms of resolution and transparency. I still remember the day when True-O-Matic Primavera finished its burn-in process, and I simply sat down for a long listen for like 5 hours, and I was simply shocked by how clean and how resolving, how detailed it sounded, because it was pretty much on the same level with the best measuring solid state headphone amplifiers. I was getting the same amounts of resolution, the same micro detail information, and I can say that, simply put, the same happens with the Feliks-Audio Performance Edition. So this one, with the right set of tubes, can push forward lots of information, and that wouldn't be really a problem focusing on anything that is playing all around you, especially with a pair of open back headphones. Highly resolving and transparent sounding tube amplifiers, those exist, that is for sure, but they usually demand substantial financial commitment. The component selection is thus considerably more important in a set amplifier, especially the quality of the input and output transformers, the chokes and the sound. Feliks-Audio didn't spare a dime on the Envy, and if you opt for the Performance Edition, then the final result will be even purer sounding. There are several reviews in the wild for the Envy. Unfortunately, none of those talked about its preamp performance, but rest assured you'll be getting your answers today. In my case, I use the Envy in between my Rockna Wave Dream Signature and also the Chord Electronics Ultima free monoblock amplifier, so basically bypassing my Ultima Pre to preamplifier and letting the Envy play as a preamp. The interesting part is that for a stereo head like me, that I'm using basically only solid state electronics, sometimes I want a little bit of tube lushness, a little bit of sweetness, and the easiest way to do it is just to change the preamp with a tube preamp, ideally with 300Bs, and that's exactly what I'm getting with the Envy. The only issue I had with it is that it doesn't have a remote control, so I needed to manually adjust the volume time and time again, and it's a hint, maybe the next generations of headphone amplifiers or preamplifiers for Feliks-Audio might use a remote control. That would be simply amazing. The very first thing that I have observed in my stereo setup is that the noise floor is just pitch black, no noises, no distortion, exactly how I experienced via headphones and also via sensitive IEMs. I even approached the loudspeakers with my ear, and nothing was coming from the tweeters, from the that is already a very good thing, believe me, because I tested some preamps that had a higher noise floor, and nobody wants that in a reference grade hi-fi setup. So this is a very good deal already, because I know I'll be getting tons of information and everything will be super defined. Secondly, the sound is no longer emanating from these two small blobs. I mean my speakers, like it was the case with my former Chord Ultima 3 preamplifier, but right now it's coming from a big blanket of sound. So basically all the space in between my left and right loudspeaker is filled with sounds. And that's exactly what I'm getting from the Ultima Pre 2 preamplifier that I own, but that one is considerably more expensive. But sincerely, I was expecting this kind of performance from an 300B preamplifier, so that's exactly what I'm getting with the Envy. Thirdly, the sound is by a hair a little bit lusher, just a bit sweeter compared to my preamp. So it definitely adds a little bit of refinement. The music is a little bit slowing down and it's more romantic sounding. But of course you can make it super dynamic and super punchy if you engage those Raytheons or Kendrads. So of course it will be changing its tonality depending on the tubes that you are using. What's interesting about the Envy and also the Ultima Pre 2 preamplifier is that some traits are very similar, which I didn't expect. For example, the bold tonality that brings forth so much oomph and mid-range purity is present in both units, and the bigger than life sound coming from the outside the room is also present on both units. A groovy bass line that shakes the foundation of this building, of course, can be found in both setups. And I'm sure that the solid-state rectification of the Envy makes it slightly faster and clearer compared to a standard tube-rectified 300B amplifier. And in my case, I didn't feel that the sound lost any of its charm. And again, the only two gripes I had with the Envy, but only when compared with the Pre 2, is that the sound wasn't quite as tightly controlled, especially in the bass region, and of course I regret that it doesn't have a remote control, as I needed to manually adjust the volume from time to time. Moving on to frequency response, we have two very different versions of the Envy. The one that uses the stock PS Vane tubes and the one that uses new old stock tubes. The stock PS Vanes can be described as linear, as neutral, very clean, resolving, the noise floor is very low. They bring so much information, but at the same time I find them a little polite sounding, not so impactful, so they will not impress you with some crazy dynamics. And the second version of the Envy is the one that uses some new old stock tubes like Raytheon 6, S and 7. Those are bringing considerably more bass. You can feel that the bass is gaining some muscle. It's definitely punchier, it's fun sounding with the Raytheons. The only problem I have with the Raytheons is that the noise floor is going up a little bit and resolution is going down. But there is another third version of the Envy, the one that uses the Kenrad 6, S and 7 tubes. This is the pure definition of fun, of impactful. This is like bringing the thunder every time a bass note is landing on your head. It's really a different type of amplifier. So if you want the most impressive bass impact, bass sustain, natural decay, and also a pretty big soundstage, and at the same time very clean sounding for a new old stock tube, then I cannot recommend you enough the Kenrad 6, S and 7. These are legendary sounding. These are bringing the nicest dynamics and the strongest kick in the bass. I have a similar story to tell you regarding its mid-range performance, but this time around I'm not using the Kenrads, but swapping them with Sylvania Tallboy. So these are, in my case, the most lush and sweet sounding driver tubes that I have in my possession. They are definitely changing the tonality of the amplifier quite a lot. These also have one of the biggest sound stages that I have experienced. The voices are gaining so much weight, and also you feel those vocal cords vibrating a little bit more, which is something that always like puts a spell on me. So these are very impressive in terms of mid-range performance. Again, the stock tubes are not bad, but at the same time those are not awakening as much emotions like these Sylvania tubes. So if you want the best mid-range performance, I believe you should go with some new old stock tubes. There are so many variants that are sounding simply impressive in the mid-range. You won't be surprised if I told you a similar story about its treble performance, but in truth, the stock PS Vanes are very good when it comes to treble extension, definition. Those are very clean, almost solid state sounding, so there is plenty of treble shimmer, energy, definition, so on and so forth. Those are basically the second best tubes when it comes to treble extension that I have tried on the Envy. However, there is one that is slightly better, not by a lot, but definitely better, and those are Ray Tubes 6SN7 Reserve. Those are basically the cleanest, the most resolving, the most extended tubes that I have tried on Envy, with the exception that they are no longer adding an extra sharpness in the treble, so I find them a little bit calmer, more refined sounding in the treble. If you combine the Ray tubes with the Western Electric 300B current production, then you are getting the best of both worlds. So I'm getting the lushness and the sweetness of Western Electric 300B with the technical performance of the Ray tubes. So you are getting both, resolving, clean, detailed, extended, but also lush and refined sounding amplifier. So if you want to have these both traits, you can go with this combo. And if you want a little bit more lushness, just replace those reserve tubes with some new old stock. And of course, you'll be getting these lushness and so on and so forth without any kind of listening fatigue or grain in the treble. So again, a very different type of amplifier depending on the tubes. Before dropping my conclusions, I just want to mention that if you want to know my journey of tube rolling, lots and lots of tubes, and also you want to have some additional sound impressions, then I cannot recommend you enough my written review that I left below. Please check it out. I believe it's the most comprehensive Feliks-Audio Envy review that you can find online. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is my feeling. Please check it out. Wrapping up, there is something about the sound of the Envy that is always calling me back. Hey, check how sweet that tune is sounding, or hey, check how effortless this headphone is sounding. And I believe that the combination of 300Bs with the 6SN7 is the golden standard among tube aficionados. And it's not just about the voicing that is impressive or the sound that is constantly changing depending on the tube combos, but also about the aesthetics and also the attention to the smallest details. It's the full package that you are getting with the Envy. And it goes without saying that this is a phenomenal sounding headphone amplifier and preamplifier. Sure, it's not the most powerful amplifier in the universe, but at the same time it was able to fully drive my entire headphone collection without a problem. I had plenty of headroom on top. It's also very technical, and I believe the custom nature of the Envy with point-to-point wiring made it also very technical sounding, and it was completely noiseless and distortionless with some IEMs. And I know it sounds heresy to call a tube amplifier distortionless or super resolving, but that's what I'm getting with the Envy. And considering all of the above, I believe it fully deserved my highest praise and award. Alright everyone, please let me know in the comment section below what you think about the Feliks Envy. Is this the ultimate amplifier in this price point, or there is something better? Please let me know. And as usual, thanks for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing if you found this video helpful, and I'll see you soon. Cheers!